I moved into Pine Hollow Estates for the quiet, for the order, for the simple belief that a well-maintained fence and a strict homeowners association meant peace of mind. It was a lie. I should have known the day I met Clara Voss. She greeted me with a smile that didn't touch her eyes. Tall, dressed in a beige power suit like it was stitched from HOA violation notices, she introduced herself as president of the board, with the kind of pride you usually reserve for neurosurgeons and astronauts. She handed me a welcome packet, a branded pen, and a calendar of monthly meetings. "We're a close community," she said. "We all do our part." At the time, I believed her. I was 39, newly divorced, and looking for stability. I found a 2-bedroom ranch on a quiet cul-de-sac with an old storage building nestled behind the hedges at the edge of my property. The previous owner had used it as a hobby shop, dusty but structurally sound. It was on the plat map, permitted and taxed under my lot. I figured I'd clean it up, maybe turn it into a workshop. That summer, I replaced the door, installed shelving, and ran a security light on solar. I locked it with a digital padlock and even added a weatherproof plaque. Private, no HOA access. I wasn't being antagonistic, just clear. Then, in October, I found the lock clipped, not broken, removed, surgically and silently. Inside, someone had piled cardboard boxes in the corner, neatly stacked and labeled. Holiday lights, Block B, wreaths, South Gate, spare folding chairs. I reported it immediately. Clara's response was stunningly casual. "We were under the impression it was a shared facility," she said at the next board meeting. "The bylaws define community use areas as any outbuilding not attached to the main structure." I raised the plat map in my hand. "It's on my deed. It's not community use." She smiled. "Well, that's debatable under the amended charter." I stared at her. "What amended charter?" Clara handed me a stapled packet with a highlighted section titled, "Emergency Provisional Rights of Use, Community Structures." It had passed with a majority vote 6 months earlier, while I was on a work trip overseas. Apparently, the vote was held via Zoom, in the middle of a state of emergency, declared when a storm knocked out power and flooded part of the community storage unit on the East End. "We needed overflow space. Temporarily," she explained. "But you didn't ask. You just took it." "It's not personal, Ethan." I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I just walked out of the meeting. That night, I replaced the lock. By morning, it was gone again. What followed was a quiet war. I locked the shed. They unlocked it. I posted a sign. They took it down. I installed a $200 trail cam under the eave. The next week, the footage showed Clara's husband, Gordon, letting himself in with bolt cutters and stacking 6 folding tables inside. No apology. No notice. I compiled the footage and brought it to the next meeting. "Tampering with HOA activities is a serious offense," Clara said, not even looking at the screen. "Tampering?" I asked. "You don't have authorization to record on shared-use structures. That's a violation of privacy." "It's on my property, under a shared-use provision." The board murmured, some nodding out of habit, others avoiding eye contact. I knew a few of them, casual chats over lawn care or mailbox theft rumors, but when push came to shove, Clara ran this place. With charm, paperwork, and a ruthless kind of composure. A week later, I got the first violation notice. Infraction: obstruction of community access to shared facility. Fine: $500. Additional note: continued noncompliance will result in escalating fees and potential suspension of HOA privileges. The envelope was cream-colored, embossed, and unsigned. At first, I told myself this was just a misunderstanding that could be cleared with a firm letter. I sent an email with legal language, citing property records, tax receipts, and pre-charter zoning rights. No response. Then I started noticing the little things. My trash wasn't picked up one week, though everyone else's was. The landscaping company accidentally skipped my lawn. A neighbor I used to chat with stopped waving. Clara called it all unfortunate coincidences. I hired a property attorney. He looked through the paperwork, raised an eyebrow, and said something I'll never forget. "They're abusing ambiguity. The clause is vague enough to protect them unless you sue." but that will cost you, and they know it. So, I filed a complaint with the county. Not a lawsuit, but a zoning inquiry. If I couldn't win in their court, maybe I could shift the game. Meanwhile, the shed kept filling up. I stopped checking it daily. It was too depressing. Each time I opened the door, it was fuller. Christmas displays, storage tubs, even a dusty old ping-pong table. I felt like a squatter in my own space. My tools were buried. My shelves bent under someone else's junk. Then came the last straw. It was a Saturday morning. I stepped out of my garage and found a man I didn't recognize, mid-50s, cargo shorts, Bluetooth earpiece, unlocking my shed. I asked who he was. "Oh, Clara said we could store a few things. Overflow from our renovation." I laughed. "You realize this is private property, right?" He shrugged. "She said it's part of the HOA commons. Don't shoot the messenger." He waved and drove off, leaving his hatch open and a futon half inside. That night, I didn't sleep. The next morning, I received a second violation notice. Infraction: interfering with approved community use. Fine: $2,000. Additional note: repeat violations may result in legal action. No appeal. No discussion. Just escalation. I stood in the doorway of my own home, holding a piece of paper that might as well have been a trespass notice on my soul. The structure I'd repaired, maintained, and paid taxes on had been turned into a dumping ground, and I was being punished for defending it. I opened the shed one last time. It was full to the rafters: bikes, chairs, yard sale signs, bins labeled HOA documents do not remove. I ran my fingers along one of the bins. Dust. Cobwebs. Indifference. But also opportunity. If they wanted to pretend this was theirs, if they wanted to weaponize paperwork, then I'd remind them what paperwork could do. I went inside, pulled out the deed, the zoning map, the plat record, and something else, an old contact I hadn't used in years. A friend from college. Real estate law now. I sent her everything. That night, I walked past the shed, padlock in place, and whispered to no one, "You're not going to win. Not like this." I stopped playing fair. After the second violation notice, I realized Clara wasn't just enforcing rules, she was writing them as she went. This wasn't about community order. It was about control. But I had something she didn't: documentation, patience, and time. The first thing I did was install 4 new motion-triggered cameras, hidden, night vision equipped, and set to upload automatically to a private cloud. I installed one behind the birdhouse near the shed, another inside the rafters, and 2 across my backyard pointing toward the access points. Within a week, I had footage. Lots of it. Clara's husband, Gordon, dropping off what looked like retail inventory, boxes labeled resin figures. Pet supplies, Clara V. Teenagers rifling through the boxes like it was a free yard sale. A man from 3 blocks over hauling a kayak into the back of the shed and then chaining it to my shelving. I didn't even know his name. I created a folder titled Unauthorized Access Log and compiled everything with timestamps. 52 entries in 2 weeks. I sent it all to the HOA email list with a message. Consider this formal notice. Your belongings are being stored on private property. The facility is not community designated. Unauthorized access will be treated as trespassing, effective immediately. I expected outrage. Maybe a meeting. What I got was silence. The next morning, someone spray-painted Community First on my driveway. Black paint. Block letters. I stared at it for a long time, then pressure washed it off without calling the police. This wasn't vandalism. It was a message. The HOA responded days later with a newsletter. We urge residents not to engage in hostile behaviors or create division over shared resources. Let's remember, Pine Hollow is stronger together. Clara was good. Always the diplomat in public, always the tyrant in private. I stopped trying to argue with her directly. Instead, I filed a formal zoning review request with the county's planning department, complete with photos, property maps, and a notarized statement asserting exclusive ownership and usage rights of the shed. But zoning reviews take time. Weeks, sometimes months. So I waited. And while I waited, Clara escalated. My mailbox was replaced with a standard community unit, overnight, smaller and bolted shut. When I complained, she claimed my previous box was non-compliant. My hedges, once praised for their symmetry, were now obstructing sightlines and had to be trimmed back 2 feet or face a $150 fine. I started documenting everything. It wasn't paranoia if it was on paper. Then, the most humiliating event yet. A local real estate agent I'd never met knocked on my door one afternoon and introduced herself with a rehearsed smile. She explained that the HOA had informed her I might be looking to rent out part of my property for long-term storage or leasing space. I blinked. "Excuse me?" She pulled out a brochure. My shed was pictured on the front, labeled Overflow Unit Available, Community Rental Option. They were trying to lease my shed behind my back. That night, I lost it. I tore every box out of that structure. Every chair, every bin, every stupid tangle of holiday lights. I piled it in the middle of my lawn, let the HOA find me, and locked the door. I didn't sleep. I waited. At 5:30 a.m., 2 men in reflective vests showed up with a clipboard and a trailer. They said they were there for inventory pickup, authorized by the board. I told them to get off my property. One of them muttered, "Asshole," as they left. Later that day, I received an email. Notice of board action. Due to repeated disruptions and non-cooperative behavior, the HOA has suspended your voting privileges and committee eligibility for 6 months. No hearing. No appeal. They'd taken my storage, painted my driveway, stripped my vote, and tried to lease my property, all while hiding behind amended bylaws and cowardly newsletters. But in trying to erase me from the community, they'd made a mistake. They'd made me invisible. I stopped showing up to meetings. I didn't argue. I let them think they'd won. Meanwhile, I dug deeper. The revised clause, the so-called emergency use provision, was, as I suspected, deeply flawed. The amendment passed during a temporary session that lacked quorum. No attorneys signed off. No county clerk filed the updated bylaws. Legally, it was more of a suggestion than enforceable law. Better still, I discovered that the shed, although listed vaguely in HOA documents, was still under my parcel's exclusive zoning. The tax office confirmed the structure was mine, fully taxable, and not listed as community property in any official capacity. I smiled for the first time in weeks. But I didn't file anything just yet. I waited. One night, I invited a few neighbors over. Not the usual HOA board loyalists, but the quiet ones, people who mowed their lawns and kept to themselves. I showed them the footage, the county documents, the leasing brochure. They didn't say much, just looked at each other and nodded slowly. "You're not the first," one of them said. "Just the first to push back." By the end of the night, I had something better than allies. I had silence breakers. The next HOA meeting was sparsely attended, but I noticed Gordon seemed tense. He fumbled his notes. Clara wasn't there. I learned later she was dealing with a sudden zoning audit request filed against the HOA storage unit. Anonymously, I filed a lien on the shed 2 days later, a formal declaration of sole ownership and removal of communal claims. It cost me $45 and an afternoon at the records office. It passed without challenge. I printed 5 copies of the updated deed and taped one to the shed door. The rest I kept for the next step. And then something unexpected happened. Clara showed up on my doorstep. She was still polished, still smug, but I saw it. A flicker of nervousness behind the lipstick smile. "I think we got off on the wrong foot," she said. I said nothing. I wanted to propose a resolution. Perhaps we could designate the structure as a shared-use storage unit officially, under new terms, of course. We'd cover maintenance and— "No," I said. She blinked. "Excuse me? It's not yours to negotiate." She stiffened. "Ethan, you're being unreasonable. This community functions on cooperation." "No. It functions on respect. And you've shown none." She stared at me, eyes narrowing, like a queen watching a pawn refuse to kneel. Then she smiled, thin, icy. "You'll regret this." I closed the door in her face. Later that night, I sat on the back steps and watched the moonlight spill across the shed's roof. It was quiet. Too quiet. I knew something was coming. Clara wasn't the type to surrender. She'd lost face, lost access, and now, finally, she'd lost power. But she hadn't lost everything yet. Not yet. And neither had I. They say revenge is best served cold. I disagree. It should be served slow, with precision, with evidence, and with the kind of silence that keeps your enemies guessing which moment they lost control. After Clara's doorstep visit, I gave it a week. Just enough time for her to think maybe, just maybe, I'd back down. That her smirk and veiled threat had worked. That I'd lick my wounds and go back to being a manageable inconvenience. Instead, I was setting the table. I began with an inventory, their inventory. Every single item stored in my shed, now reclaimed by me, was cataloged with photos, timestamps, and physical descriptions. Folding chairs, faux Christmas trees, a bizarre number of extension cords, and a stack of weather-damaged HOA event banners. But the piece de resistance was the 5 boxes labeled Records, Clara V. They weren't locked. Inside were handwritten ledgers, receipts, memos, printed emails. HOA operating documents going back 5 years. I wasn't looking for scandal. I was looking for leverage. What I found was something better. Buried in one of the binders was a budget from 3 years ago, with line items that didn't match what had been disclosed in HOA meetings. Event funds redirected. Landscaping invoices duplicated. And one particularly shady payment made to a company called Verdon Consulting, which, according to a quick online search, didn't exist anymore. At first glance, it looked like simple financial mismanagement. At second glance, it looked deliberate. It wasn't just the shed Clara had been using for personal gain. She'd been using the whole HOA. I compiled a dossier. Not a flashy exposé. Just cold, quiet facts. Then I sent copies, and signed, from a burner email to 3 people: the County Regulatory Board, the Pine Hollow treasurer, who'd resigned mysteriously last year, and the whisper group of neighbors I'd met weeks earlier. I didn't need to be seen. I needed the system to catch up. While the wheels of bureaucracy turned, I focused on my move. I filed a notice of intent to auction abandoned property, a legal option in our state for structures under private ownership. I attached the photo evidence, timestamps, and receipts for padlocks and storage. Posted public notice in the local paper as required. Waited 7 days. Not a single item was claimed. Not even the HOA records do not remove bins. And then, quietly, professionally, I hired an auctioneer. He was confused at first. "You're selling folding chairs and plastic tubs?" "Yes." "You expect to make money?" "Not really." He nodded. "Petty dispute?" "No," I said. "It's justice." With a receipt. We scheduled it for a Saturday morning. No fanfare. Just a legally advertised, properly filed public auction held in my backyard. 10 people showed up, most from outside the neighborhood. They bought almost everything. The folding chairs? $45. The resin gnome collection? $15. The boxes of wreaths? $8 total. The bins labeled Records. Shredded on site. I didn't keep a cent. Every dollar went into a community food bank donation, with a receipt mailed anonymously to Clara's mailbox. I thought she'd confront me immediately. She didn't. Instead, she tried to go nuclear. That Monday, I received a hand-delivered cease and desist order, printed, not from a law office. It accused me of destroying HOA property and violating the community covenant. I scanned it, then laughed. Because attached to this cease and desist was a spreadsheet, an inventory of what had been stolen. Every single item listed with a description and an estimated value. $90 wreaths. $200 per chair. A folding table listed at $500. She had itemized her lies. I took the document straight to the county auditor. Turns out, overvaluing minor HOA assets and claiming them as liabilities on community ledgers is not only unethical, it's illegal when tied to community dues. The auditor's response came in the form of a scheduled audit. Not just of Clara's finances, but the entire HOA budget. Suddenly, things began to shift. Board members who hadn't spoken in months started resigning. A quiet email from the treasurer revealed he'd returned after reviewing anonymous concerns. Gordon stopped walking his dog past my house. And Clara vanished. For 2 weeks, I didn't see her. Then the envelope arrived. No return address. No signature. Inside was a simple note. You win. Enjoy your empty shed. It wasn't angry. It was bitter. Resigned. But it wasn't over. 2 days later, I received a letter from the county zoning office. My request to formally designate the structure as a private storage facility with exclusive access had been approved. The HOA would be notified. Any attempts to challenge the designation would require a hearing with a judge. It was mine. Again. Officially. Legally. Irrefutably. But that wasn't the victory. The real victory came weeks later at the next HOA election. Clara didn't run. Neither did Gordon. The board, now half-empty and under review, was forced to hold an open-floor election. I didn't volunteer, but someone nominated me. I declined. I didn't want power. I just wanted peace. And now, finally, it was quiet. I walked to the shed that night, opened the door, and breathed in the silence. Empty.
Clean. Mine.
There were no victory speeches. No applause. Just the satisfaction of knowing I'd done it the right way. No threats. No shouting. Just leverage. And patience. Peace isn't something you win. It's something you build, slowly, quietly, in the aftermath of noise. And Pine Hollow had been nothing but noise for far too long. It had been 3 months since the auction. 2 since Clara disappeared from the neighborhood, moved, apparently. No notice. Just a for sale sign that appeared overnight, followed by a flurry of open houses and then, one day, an empty driveway. The house sold quickly. Probably cash. No one missed her. Not publicly. The new owners, a retired couple from Oregon, seemed unaware of the invisible war they'd inherited. They asked polite questions about trash days and fence lines. I told them what they needed to know, no more, no less. The shed, now empty but clean, stood like a monument in my backyard. Not to the conflict, but to the lesson. You don't need to raise your voice when you have the receipts. That winter, the HOA held its first transparent election in years. Open ballots. Publicly reviewed bylaws. The new president was a soft-spoken guy named Marcus who worked remotely and had a thing for native landscaping. He knocked on my door one afternoon with a clipboard and nervous energy. I know what you've been through, he said, and I just want to make sure we're doing this right now. We stood outside the shed. I looked at him for a long time. You want to do it right? I asked. He nodded. Then start by remembering why people live here in the first place. They don't want a micro-government. They want a neighborhood. He looked relieved. That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say. Before he left, he handed me a form, an offer to reinstate my voting privileges and committee eligibility. I accepted, but with conditions: no more community access policies, without unanimous approval, and no shared property loopholes buried in footnotes. He agreed on the spot. For the first time in a year, the rules made sense again. And still, I didn't attend the meetings. Not because I didn't care. Because I finally didn't have to. One evening in early spring, I opened the shed again. The air inside was dry, clean. I took my time, installed shelves the way I wanted, put in cedar panels, hung a vintage lantern from a hook near the rafters. It wasn't just a storage facility anymore, it was a retreat, a personal space, a place that reminded me. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't destruction. It's restoration. Around that time, I started hearing stories. Not just about Clara, though plenty of people were suddenly willing to talk, but about others. Neighbors who'd been silenced. People who'd lost yard space, had assessments imposed without explanation, even had pets restricted because of unofficial breed limitations. Clara's reign hadn't been petty, it had been systemic. And no one had fought back. Not until now. I hadn't set out to become an example. But it turns out that standing your ground does more than protect your space. It gives others permission to reclaim theirs. The guy 2 streets over replaced his mailbox. said it had been unapproved for years, but he didn't care anymore. A woman on Birch Lane put her flamingo lawn ornaments back up. Small rebellions, sure, but they added up. The neighborhood began to breathe again. And then came the letter. It arrived in a plain envelope, no return address, postmarked from a nearby town. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Maybe you were right, but you didn't have to humiliate me.
C.
No apology. No admission. Just resentment disguised as reflection.
I didn't respond.
What was there to say? She'd written her chapter. I'd written mine. And Pine Hollow had moved on. Sometimes, late at night, I still think about the moment I locked the shed that final time after clearing it out, heart pounding, hands shaking, unsure of what would come next. I didn't know then what I was building.
But I know now.
It wasn't about storage. It wasn't even about revenge. It was about boundaries and who gets to draw them. About ownership, not of land, but of dignity. And about the quiet power of saying no and meaning it. They added a bench by the community lake that spring. Nothing grand, just a weathered plank, 2 armrests, and a small plaque that read, "Dedicated to those who keep watch, even when it's thankless." No one said who donated it, but I have a feeling I know. And I make it a point to sit there every few weeks, just to remind myself. The rules can be rewritten. The powerful can be checked. And sometimes, the shed that starts a war ends up becoming the quiet heart of a home.